name is Blanca Gonzalez. I'm born in Mexico. I did. I'm born in Mexico and I immigrated to the United States in 1996, so 21 years ago. And I was a single mom. When I was 16, I became a mom. For some reasons between the families of the father of my boy and my mom, they were no agree, and I didn't get married. So my mom said, well, we don't need it, we can make it. So I had my baby, and later I get married, and then I have another two kids, one daughter and one son, and I was married 20 years. In the middle of those 20 years, I tried to go back to school to do something, but my husband said that I don't need it. That I have a house, that I have kids, I have enough food at home, and that's it. That I don't need it to go to school. So when I was 20 years married, I asked for the divorce to try to do something else. I feel like still I have something to do. So was when I emigrated to here, and then I'm started working in restaurants and different kinds, even cleaning houses. And then I meet another man and I get married again. During the dating time was okay, but when we got married, it was the same thing. I have to do whatever he say. I don't have the right to send money to my mom, even though I was working, and didn't work. He tried me like I was part of his furniture or something. So 5 months later, I quit. So I moved out, and then I come back and I went to school. I tried to learn a little more things, and I have wonderful families. They were like angels around me. I know God helping me always and taking care of me. And when I was ready to go to the immigration, and I tell my story about my second marriage. At the beginning, I was a little scared, but the person that was in charge of me, my records, he said, "Don't worry, we don't need him. We can make it by ourselves." So yeah, I get my papers, and I'm a citizen already. So I keep working, and all the time positive. We have many issues, health issues, money issues, but my family, I think we are a very strong relationship that we can keep going. Doesn't matter what happens, maybe I learned this from my mom. She became a widow when she was 10 years married and with 5 kids, and she made it. So maybe I saw her, how strong she was, and I learned from that, and I keep going, and I'm here and I'm happy. We have been in many places, California, Chicago, New York, Hawaii, all over the places. I like it, and I want to keep going. Doesn't matter what happened. I was not lucky to have a good marriage, but I felt lucky that I meet a lot of people, men, like we are talking about men in my life, my bosses especially, I feel grateful for my life. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. So my name is Sophia. I've been in Portland, Oregon for 4 years, and I want to speak about working with communities of color, the immigrant and refugee communities here, and the LGBTQ community, which I've been involved with for 4 years in Portland. But what I really want to touch on is why has sexual harassment and sexual violence and rape become normalized in our culture? And this is something that I've been questioning as a young 28-year-old American woman my entire life. And I think it's important to talk about the root causes. So at a young age, boys and men in this country are often given language or taught language to not be anything associated with being a girl or being a woman. Don't act girly, man up, don't be a woman. And so when we utilize this language, and this is instilled in us from a very young age, it becomes this subconscious thought that being a woman is negative. It's not good to be a woman, and it perpetuates behaviors that become normalized in society for men. And men begin to think that masculinity has everything and anything not having to do with being a woman. So I think it's really critical to look at how our language has perpetuated this behavior. As someone who has studied gender-based violence and gender inequality in the developing world and developed world, I think it's really critical to highlight some statistics that may be eye-opening in our own country that I'm sure many of you are aware of and maybe you're not. According to the National Center for Statistics, 1 in 3 women have been sexually assaulted in the United States. 1 in 3. 1 in 5 women have been raped in the United States. But we know that this number is actually much higher, and it's probably more like 100%. Don't quote me on that, but think about all of the women who haven't come forward out of fear, out of being scared to talk about their experience. The majority of women in my life as a young 28-year-old woman have been victims of harassment, rape, and sexual violence. And I could not believe that my close friends, my mother, my cousins, were all victims of sexual harassment or violence. But I think it's really critical that we can't really have a meaningful conversation or dialogue about sexual harassment and violence if we do not address communities of color and the intersectionalities of race, class, and gender, and how this defines our experience. My favorite author in college that kind of exposed me to gender inequality was Bell Hooks. And I don't know if you're familiar with Bell Hooks, but she talks about looking at intersectionalities and how this defines our experience within our identity. And so we know that communities of color face disproportionate rates of sexual violence in the United States. According to the National Advocacy Through Action, women of color experience higher rates of sexual violence than white females. African American women experience intimate partner violence at a rate of 35% times higher than in white females, and about 2.5 times the rate of women in other races. I also want to highlight that we have, due to globalization and welcoming immigrant and refugee communities into the United States, immigrant and refugee women experience disproportionate rates of sexual harassment and violence. I've been working the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, Unite Oregon, and the Oregon Health Equity Alliance for 4 years in Portland, Oregon, and I talk to refugee women from Somalia who come over here and are afraid to just walk down the street, not just solely because they're from Somalia and because of the color of their skin, but because they're women and they're being harassed by several different types of men in Portland. So I want to talk about or highlight how can we improve the lives of women and girls in the United States, and all women and girls, undocumented women, lesbian women, immigrant and refugee women, trans women. So it all comes down to education. We have a broken public education system in this country, and this is kind of shocking, but only 24 states and the District of Columbia make sex education mandatory. This leaves out 25 states in the United States that don't make this mandatory in their public school system. And this perpetuates a culture of ignorance, a lack of knowledge, misunderstanding around gender equality and sex education in our country. It's pretty startling to know that half of our country doesn't make that mandatory in 2018. The United States is falling behind in gender equality. About a decade ago, the United States was ranked 3rd in the world for gender equality. Today, it's ranked 26th. We are far behind France, we are far behind Australia and Canada, and many other countries in the developed world. And I think it's because we are allocating our resources to education and promoting healthy learning. So how can we shift this culture, and how can we engage men on this subject in a meaningful way? And how can we improve our education system?
Hello, my name is Joshua, and I'll just be talking a little bit about my life in relation to this discussion and the way that some of the things that men get acculturated into are some of the situations that shape us that unfortunately create this culture of violence and inequality. I grew up very much involved with Jehovah's Witness religion, which is very intense. And it's not necessarily an entirely bad thing at all. The one positive aspect I did enjoy about being a Jehovah's Witness growing up is that it's multicultural. My daughter's mom is Haitian and Filipino. This was normal for me to see many married couples that were not of the same ethnicity. On the other hand, when I got married at the ripe age of 20, old age, the sermon itself talked about how I am the head of the house and that she should be the submissive wife. This is what you get raised in. I was talked about, I was encouraged to enjoy the global brotherhood of man, not the sisterhood. That word sisterhood is not something I would have heard. So there was definitely a gender and hierarchy that was just natural for me to grow up with. And then I really thrived in it. I became like an assistant pastor within the Jehovah's Witness religion. It's called a ministerial servant. But it wasn't meant for me to be, I guess, to be a man of faith in that faith. And I got publicly excommunicated from the religion for being a heretic, for questioning things. And this happened a month after my daughter was born. And so here I was growing up under a traditionalist view of how to be a male, my marriage life, everything. Now I'm raising a child not knowing where any of this fits into my worldview. And this also was a challenge for my wife at the time. And as I raised my daughter in this world, as she became a teenager, I had to deal with several instances of her facing not good situations with men. One, I didn't raise her up in a religion at this time. She wanted to go to a church group. So she goes to a church group, and a young 16-year-old boy, when she's in her teens, offers to take her to the church group. And then pulls over one time, puts his hands on her body, and then tells her, I'm paraphrasing, that she owes him something sexually for him giving her rides. And I had to deal with that, talk to the parents, and had them put in counseling. But unfortunately, that wasn't the only instance. And prior to that, I had to deal with working with the detective to help put my own father into jail. And my own dad is a sexual predator. And then, all right. So my aunt called me, my late aunt, and she said, nephew talked to me, and I said, okay, so here's the story. And just like the sound of the alarm was like, but so then she says, well, tell me the story, and I tell her, I talk to her, and then she says, well, thanks for telling me about your dad, let me tell you about mine. It's my grandfather. And it was a worse story. And I kind of already knew some of that. And so it's pretty heavy to then realize that, you know, as a male, you're coming from a culture of several generations of negative acts towards women and sometimes towards children, and it's heavy. But then, you know, I thought to myself as the Me Too movement was being discussed and more stuff was coming out, I think that I was thinking, you know, I'm not necessarily an enlightened male. I realized that even though I have good relationships with so many women and I get along with a lot of my exes, you know, my dad and some of these negative men that did really bad things are like, just because I'm not that doesn't mean that there's not, if you're not bad, it doesn't mean you can't be better. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily always good. And it just made me kind of realize this other dilemma, and I think that this is one of the struggles for us, is that if we just look to the person that's incarcerated or some producer who's outed or all these kind of things, you know, and we're giving ourselves a free pass because we weren't that guy, then we're not going to change the environment that makes things happen, situations like my daughter, or put situations that make a situation where, you know, my father might have got arrested, but many, many men are going free for those kind of things. And so, that's just my thoughts on it.
I am an activist and a community organizer first and foremost in my life, and so we're going to start this off with a chant. When I say time's up, you say no more. Time's up!
No more!
Time's up!
No more!
When I say time's up, you say no more. Time's up!
No more!
Time's up!
No more!
No more. My name's Amanda Rain, and my work is Speaking the Unspeakable, and what I do is I help people speak the truth of their experience and step into greater empowerment with their voice. I teach communication tools to help people have more skill in their relationships and to both personal and professional. And I also teach consent workshops to kind of reframe our sexuality and our intimacy within the framework of consent culture. We very much, as has been kind of laid out there, we have a rape culture within our society that has deep roots, right? We have compounded trauma upon compounded trauma upon compounded trauma. And we in this time now are very much trying to find our way out. And really the way out is the way through, which means that it's really uncomfortable. And that we have to take the taboos and the things that we're afraid of, and we have to face them. And we have to speak our truth, even when we're afraid, even when we're facing retaliation. And that courage has to come within. Courage is the heart. And so whenever we need to stand in our courage, we have to strengthen our heart. And with that, we have a strong heart. One of the things that I have done is to participate in 2 community efforts to bring accountability to perpetrators of sexual assault. And it's very difficult work. And about 3 years ago in Portland, we had five different men get called out for rape around the same time. And so it was up across multiple communities of people, and we were grappling with what to do. And so 3 women, of which I was one, came together to create a series of workshops with Call to Safety and various organizations who work with sexual assault to do education awareness events. And it was amazing to me as I facilitated conversations and we went through this experience together, and then we had an integration at the end. And each time that we had community conversations around it, it was amazing to me how there was this rise to the defense of men that would come up. But not all men are bad. We'd start talking about the things that we needed to talk about, and that would be what would happen. And so that's kind of what I want to speak to, is that I think part of the challenge, I think there's many challenges within our compounded trauma that we have, and what I've seen is that whenever one person starts talking about their pain and their trauma, everyone else is like, but I'm hurting too! But I'm hurting too, because we don't give space for the voices that are hurting. And so once it's like broken open, everyone's like, oh my God, there's like a floodgate that happens, right? And so just, if that happens, just big breaths, right? Deep breaths. Just allow ourselves to like breathe and recenter and refocus. And then part of it is also that men are kind of in a double bind, right? You can't feel. The only acceptable emotions are anger, and more anger, or shutting down. And then when you're like hit up against experiences that cause you to have feelings, you kind of don't know what to do with them, which is valid and fair. And so then it's like, just kind of like, I think what is happening in part is like, just get the feelings to stop. Can someone just get this to stop? And so there's like this defensiveness that comes in, and it's like, not all men are bad, right? And the thing about defensiveness within communication is once that comes into play, there's no communication happening. Like everything is shut down. And so in that moment, step back, pause, take a breath, go to the bathroom, take a break, do something to recenter and refocus, and don't take it personal. And it's really important that we allow ourselves that space, and knowing that just because bad things have happened, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. That's my 5 minutes.
Everybody, check, check. All right, so now we're going to take questions from the audience on any topic related to this conversation. What's on your mind? Just raise your hand and I'll come to you. You don't have to come up here.
Thanks. I'm Kelsey. Full disclosure, I'm Sophia's roommate. But I have a question just related to all of this, I guess. So Dave Chappelle has a special recently, maybe some people saw it, where he talks about apartheid, and he talks about, I think, the Me Too movement. But he basically says that during apartheid, instead of criminalizing everyone and like throwing them in jail, they like forgave everyone and then ended up moving forward. I've had like all of this coming out, a lot of anger. I'm sure that a lot of other women have anger as well. So I guess my question is, how do we hold people accountable without demonizing them and like seeing them as bad people per se? Question.
Who wants to take it?
Well, I think there's always degrees, right? I remember the speaker a long time ago saying, people judge you by your actions, not your intentions. And I think that there's different degrees. There's a lot of, I think that there's a lot of men who are not acculturated into very good views about dealing with women. And they might have certain good intentions, but their actions are wrong. And that means they're fixable because the actions are something that they may have learned and their intentions are there. They can unlearn behavior. The past can't be erased, and people who face being hurt by someone, that's up to them to decide, I think, how that person can be forgiven or not, or what to do with that. But yeah, I think that's I think that anytime we're having a good community discussion, the issue is working with the people who may not be in this room or on the right side, but in their hearts they would be if they were to get out of this like dark hole of like the world that they have been in. And it's pretty dark, some of them. I mean, I have a relative, his dad used to run around the house naked, chasing his mom drunk with Vaseline in his hand. When you were a child and you watch that, like how do you grow up as a man? And if you're not having people to talk about it out loud and working through that, it's harder to grow up being a different kind of person. But I just think, I just think working with the people who are workable. That's my thought.
So I want to speak to two things. One is the anger that you talked about. Anger is not knowing what to do about something, right? We don't know what to do about it, so like the frustration builds, next thing you know, we get angry. And it's very much a situation that we don't know what to do to get from where we know we don't want to be to where we know is possible. So just opening up to a space of compassion for ourselves and others can be a little helpful with that. And then also just trying stuff, like, okay, action. Action is the remedy to despair. And action is also, I think, the remedy to anger, because it's like, if you don't know, then trial and error, just keep doing things until you figure out what works and what helps move it forward. The other thing, in terms of holding people accountable without demonizing them, the key to that is not shaming people, right? And Brene Brown is an amazing teacher about shame and vulnerability. And the key to shame is to not connect the action to the identity, right? So, not connecting the bad behavior to the person to where it locks them into being that. One of the things that Brene Brown says is that everyone needs a platform of self-worth to build upon. If people don't have a platform of self-worth to build upon, shaming them basically just reinforces the bad behaviors that they're already doing. So it's just an invitation for them to continue doing fucked up things. So it's really important that within that we have fierce compassion, right? So there's a way that we draw that line in the sand and say no more. And I'll hold it with a compassionate hand open of when you're ready to learn something new, come. There's space for you.
Thank you. Let's take another question. I know it's scary, but I know there are questions.
I was going to pitch into that conversation a little bit. To me, there's something about empathy that leads people to be more sensitive and aware of things. I can project. I think everybody can hear me.
We don't need the mic.
For the live stream, it's better with the microphone. So I also wanted to address the idea of the gradations between sexual assault and sexual harassment. And that to me is a continuum with varying degrees along it, and neither are correct, neither are right, but somewhere along that continuum are a whole bunch of shades of gray that are getting lost in the conversation. And if we want to have a conversation with men about sexual assault and sexual harassment, there needs to be an identification of what those gradations are.
Did you want to ask a question too?
No, I wanted to
I
contribute to the
saw-
conversation.
Thank you. I saw a question over here.
Yeah, I sort of want to go back to the education theme and the fact that only half of elementary schools, half of the states mandate sex education. And also the idea that people have to come from a place of emotional strength to have a platform to grow on. How about really focusing education back at the new parenting classes and teaching emotional intelligence and how our emotional lives actually develop as children and all the role modeling parents do, and just invest right now in the education of new kids, because downstream is pretty fucked up. I mean, there are a lot of old people who are not going to change. We should focus on the next generation of kids having a solid foundation.
I completely agree. Thanks for your question. So I think there's multiple issues going on when we talk about education, but also the broken families, lack of mental health. Mental health is not a priority in this country. We'd like to think that it is, but so many healthcare providers don't cover mental health or seeing a therapist or a counselor. So we have a lot of children and young boys who probably need counseling and mental health or don't have that platform where they can learn the coping skills and learn how to be emotionally intelligent. So I think it does start also in the school, but also within the family. And I worked with Unite Oregon, which is a wonderful nonprofit organization. Please look it up. We do incredible immigrant and refugees work. And actually one of the programs they have is called the Build Program, and it's all about working with parents to basically mentor their children while they're in school, and also talk about sex education within different communities. So you're absolutely right.
And it's not just immigrants who need that.
Right, everyone.
Else.
Yeah, and I'm coming from a place of having worked with that community mostly. So, but yes, I agree. All children are in need of this to be successful and to thrive.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Blanca, what, in your experience going from teen mom to immigrant and 2 times married and divorced, what would be some insights and advice you would have for men today in terms of how they can make a difference in the lives of the women around them?
Well, I went through many situations where I feel
Resistance.
No, the races, even in the same community, Latin community, the people that were already here and the new ones that are coming, they are very strong. And then at work, when I see the men, they make more money than the women, and when I ask for some accommodation because it's heavy boxes or something, they say, "Where is the description of your job? If you can't." And I was like, well, yeah, they say 40 pounds, but not in the top of the shelf, right? I can carry 40 pounds, but not in the top of the shelf. It is like that. But I found at the same time very, how can I say, good men. They are helping because I'm a woman, and they, because we need to work as a team, each other, they really go to they really go to the team working. Doesn't matter if I'm old and the other is short and the other is tall or whatever, you know. And I know that there are a lot of good men that they have a good education at home, you know. But I found that a lot of them they don't care, and it's just scary, very scary.
What advice would you give to men today?
Well, we say, well, you have a mother, you have a daughter, your wife, a sister, but maybe to tell them, you will have a son, you know, you have a brother, and they deserve better life, so teach them, tell them what to do the right thing, you know, and we are a team, even though we are not working together as a job, but we are a team to build something better for our grandkids, in my case. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another question from the audience? Anything bubbling in your mind? All right, well, I have plenty to make up for it, so. One question I have is around female sexuality. And, you know, we're talking about rape, we're talking about sexual assault. Are women in this context where nearly, Sophia, to your point, nearly 100% of women are sexually harassed, assaulted, are women sexually liberated in this country?
So I'll offer that within Bell Hook's work, she talks about internalized isms. And so what I learned in my speech communication training is that repetition is the most effective form of persuasion. So when we hear things over and over again, it seeps in. And within that, you know, I had a whole experience of waking up to my own sexism. And when I say that, people often assume that I'm talking about sexism against men. But what I'm talking about is sexism against women. And within this, it's, you know, you can't look at me as a shining example of what you should do towards women, because I may have my own issues that I'm working through, which I have had plenty in my life. And so, you know, especially when you compound that with the box that we're in between slut shaming and being a prude, and then having all these internalized isms, it's a full-on process of unpacking all the baggage that we're carrying around to find our place of liberation. I think liberation is definitely possible. I think most, and I don't want to really generalize, but I'll say that it's common that women are not actually liberated in their sexuality, that it's kind of more lip service that we pay to it so we can feel like it, but when in the actuality, how we dress and how we act and whether we're willing to have the experiences that we feel a desire to have, that may be another story.
Anyone else want to comment?
Well, I'll just say this. I think since right. I remember what I think is really profound is that in a human sexual behavior class I took, the book said that most heterosexual men are homosocial. That we we hang out together and we have sex with women. And that women form a kind of solidarity, the topic and the acts all form a solidarity aspect for us men. And I think one of the biggest problems is to break up the homosexuality aspect, because I can't really speak to this topic as much as to say that I can listen to this topic. Where can I listen to this topic? From my guy friends? right? So like what's, and I really feel like the one thing that's been helping me grow as much is to actually have a diverse group of girls that are my genuine friends that I love, that, lo and behold, have a lot of different opinions about this topic. I have a lot of girlfriends that have a lot of different thoughts about stripping, about erotica, about polyamory or not, or what is it, what, you know, so these ideas. And what you kind of realize is that it really comes down to, instead of you as a male listening to the right thing that makes you feel good about the direction you want things to go in, right, which is to hear the girl tell you the things that reinforce what you grew up, or maybe what your inclinations are, is to actually just listen and say, okay, you know if you're trying to be a better person within the context of this or not. And so, yeah, I think, liberated or not, there's a wide range of views, and it'll get worked out while we all listen, and especially us listening. Yeah.
I have a question. I mean, just prompted a thought, is that then you get to the question of what is sexual liberation? What does that mean? I mean, it might mean something to someone, when you talked about the stripping or the erotica or whatever, what does that mean for both sides, really? I think that's, I mean, when you're talking about that topic, I mean, just that struck me as, how do we define what that really means?
There's no one-size-fits-all definition of sexual liberation, really. It's going to look differently for everyone. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's also interesting that, you know, there's all these stereotypes also around men and their sexuality. And from my experience, I have found that they also don't hold true to the core. Like, they're actually not what men desire or how they want to engage. And there's much more to all of it for all of us, and so it's just that, and I think that listening piece of really listening to each other and engaging in that consent culture is really the way through that, to find out what works for us, what feels good, and find our liberation.
Great. So, any other questions? We're going to wrap up in a few minutes. You have one? Yeah.
So, growing up in Texas and having, in my youth, perpetrated sexual harm through ignorance and lack of education and various factors, alcohol and other, no excuses. And having gone through a journey of learning so many ways in which the view and interaction that I've had with female population was very skewed based on a lot of what we're talking about here. And so I'm curious if we can give some simple, like, mindful check-ins of what is your intention? How do you view this person? What, like, do you have any simple tools for people to start on that journey of checking in with themselves, to gain the empathy, to understand how we view and interact with those that we are engaging with, and why, how, for what, for who, and how do we honor agency for each individual through that process, and learning and grow with specific.
You know, I was thinking about that question, like, would there be an answer myself? Like, it's always nice when there's like a simple answer, like, you know, a short vlog that can be made. But you know, I really think that the working on being an empath or caring about, you know, I mean, ultimately, miscommunication always happens with everybody under any context, and that's a problem. And it can produce bad results outside of sexual, anything. Miscommunication can be bad. And it's awesome, but I think we know over time if we're a kind of selfish person, or if we're, and that's kind of something that I was like thinking about as well. I mean, do we see things the way we want to see because we're about ready to try to get things that we want to get in life? That can be on many different levels. And working through that. And then I think the other thing is, and I don't know if this directly speaks to that, to my thought on this, is that one of the problems I feel like I've had is the one-size-fits-all model. You know, I get a girlfriend a certain way, I have a sexual relationship in a certain way, and that's all good. But then another girl can be triggered in a very different way through a different set of experiences, and it's not okay. Like, and just being aware more that you know, we're not working in a one-size-fits-all context. You know, that we can have one girlfriend talk about a story that's funny to them about how they got together with their lover, and it's like a very playful thing, and to somebody else, that's like the worst context they'd ever want to like see anything in. And so I just think if we're working at trying to not be that person, like it's a full-time job, like, but it makes life better for everybody. You know, being hardworking and self-reflection. That's my thoughts on that.
Who else would like to contribute to that question? I don't know.
I have more. I just feel like I've been talking a lot. So, you know, it's very nuanced and very complex, right? So every little thing has this whole ocean of stuff underneath it. So it's really, so the one thing I'll offer you in this moment is that slow down. Slow down. We live in this really fast-paced culture. We see someone we're attracted to, next thing you know, we're off and running and in a relationship and all those things, and everything moves really fast, and we don't even really know each other. Next thing you know, you start to get to know each other, and you're like, oh my God, who are you? Who am I? What's going on here? How'd this happen? Right? And so just slow down. Slow down. That's how you check in with yourself. You slow down. This thing happens. How's that make me feel? That thing happens. He said that. She said that. What do I think about that? Follow the attraction. So I have this philosophy of following my attractions. And what I've found since I started doing this, when they think they start off as sexual, usually they turn out to be something totally different. Like totally different. And I'm like, oh wow, like if I would have just went off and running, it would have been, I might have missed what's actually here. And so being curious, like there's this spark, what is this? Not putting assumptions of what it is, and our projections and expectations and all of the things that we want and our hopes and dreams, and putting it onto this spark of something, but we don't really know what it is, and so then being curious, like what is this? And allowing it to unfold like a flower at the pace of a flower, as opposed to, you know, a tornado or hurricane or whatever else you want to put in there.
I want to go off what you just said. Thank you. I really like that you said if we need to slow down, because in an age of technology and online dating, and which is completely fine, it's actually one of the #1 ways people are meeting now in my generation and other generations. People are not slowing down, and that culture of technology doesn't promote healthy communication or slowing down. It really just promotes us rushing, wanting instant gratification, wanting the first hot guy or girl that we see to come our way and to satisfy us. And the problem with that is it's not realistic, and I think people aren't taking the time to actually get to know the person on the other side of the phone or the bar or wherever they met that person they're interested in. But I do think that this kind of modern society that we're in doesn't encourage us to take the time to communicate to each other in a meaningful way.
Do you want to say? Yeah, I just wanted to speak to what you said and just say that I think it's always possible to rise above whatever you were given. I grew up in maybe a similar kind of situation, like politically that you did, and I knew that none of that was for me, and I always felt like an outsider, and because of that I was able to figure some shit out that I wouldn't maybe have if I had been like wholly accepted and whatever. And the way that Joshua was talking about his upbringing, all of the things that Blanca's been able to do with her life, like some of those things aren't sanctioned by society, but you know that there's something to get to on the other side, even though it's
really hard to get divorced twice, and it's really hard to get excommunicated, and it's really hard to leave your shitty little town and whatever. But you can always do that. So, yeah.
I think it's important that, you know, we all appreciate how complex all these issues are. You know, there is no simple answer. And I would love to see a movement across our country, but the planet is fine too, but across our country that's going to have to be really organized into the different segments that need to be worked on, because you mentioned education. And I think that from elementary school, kindergarten forward, there needs to be mandatory education on communication, healthy communication, on friendship, what does it mean to be a good friend, on respect, what that means for another person, compassion, which is huge. We cannot understand a man, we cannot understand another woman if we can't have compassion. And some people can't change their background. They're too traumatized, or it's too well ingrained, and they cannot change. And in order not to demonize, we do have to have a huge amount of compassion. Someone who perpetrates something on someone's baby one day, and you know, what happened to that baby? You know, what happened? And that was somebody's son, you know, or somebody's daughter. And so we have to have a huge amount of compassion, but there has to be a huge change in their culture and their society for people to know what it means to have civil communication where you can exchange ideas and not demonize and not be aggressive and not be hostile. We have to learn how to civilly communicate. And you know, we have to raise our sons to respect women. And we have to raise our sons, you know, to be husbands or partners who respect and care for women. And we also have what's going on in our society is, you know, we got the macho men, and what was that congresswoman do, you know, whatever to a friend, and, you know, kind of cupped his hands around her boobs while she was asleep. Well, you know, what do fraternities do? I mean, what are we encouraging? And then all of a sudden, you know, the men are so confused, like, what? You know, that was harassment or what? We have to get it straight. We have to help our women understand it. We have to help our men understand, where does playfulness, frat kind of behavior turn into harassment? And when does that turn into sexual assault? And then all of a sudden it's a rape, you know, but we have to get much clearer, and we have to educate and educate and educate. And I think that classes in all these, in parenting, classes in relationships and communication should be as mandatory as PE and social studies and English 101, all those. It should be a mandatory part of education in this country.
I want to ask one more question, and then we'll probably wrap it up unless anybody else has a burning question, which can be after mine. Joshua, I just wanted to ask you what kind of questions surfaced for you as a man going through what you went through with your father being convicted for sexual predatory behavior?
A lot. I think that what really made it difficult for me is to, and actually it's not a past tense thing, it's a better thing, but I never actually did this like so open before, and it was like, that is kind of a heavy thing. I think it's just, it's hard then to feel your own sexuality and engage and know where to be right? And I think that the hard part for myself was that shortly after this happened, my ex-wife and I, which we get along great now, and I've had my daughter a lot of times, but she's never, like we both worked with my daughter well, but we were young, we got a divorce. I married my first girlfriend. I was a virgin on my wedding night, like a good little sport. And the problem is I was in a college town with college girls wanting to date and thinking about this with my father, and this was very difficult. And it's still sometimes difficult, and sometimes it's like, I kind of feel like I have a little bit of just like, it's just a very overwhelming sense to try to like put it all together. And you know, that's why I kind of feel like it's always good to keep self-reflecting, because sometimes I'm so repressed. You talked about taking a deep breath, and I was like, yeah, right? And but then in different environments, you know, I can adapt very well to different environments. This is a very different kind of environment than if I'm out drinking with a bunch of guy friends and we're all lonely dudes, right? And so there's different ways of engaging, and then sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm like, was I a good person? And sometimes I'm too hard on myself, and other times I should have been harder on myself. That's what I feel that this does. And that's, I'm assuming that's what a lot of guys, other people would feel in these contexts.
Thank you. Any last words from the panel before we wrap up?
I'll offer 3 important words for men when you are encountering a woman who is sharing something really painful or difficult around harassment or sexual assault. I believe you. As a complete sentence, with nothing more needed.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining this last segment and for being here tonight. And please keep on having these conversations.